Hello, readers, and welcome to another episode of Keep It Fictional, a podcast for book lovers by book lovers from the Port Moody Public Library. Now, if you have spent any time with us talking about the books that we love or looking at our staff picks, except for mine, because I don't have any staff picks for a very specific reason, you know that everyone here kind of has like a brand of books that we kind of associate with them. Virginia's is, of course, Banana Pants. Sadie's, I think of like fantasy, YA, like lots of swishy skirts, but then like action and like empowerment in a good way, in a very, very good way. Emma's, I think sports manga and huzzah for the warrior bonds between men. Yeah. And we've all kind of got a distinct kind of genre or format, or perhaps like passion that we love to read about. Anything recommended by RM's BTS or translated by Anton Her. We've all kind of got our brands, our lanes, if you will. And today we have decided to swerve out of our lanes and crash into the oncoming traffic of our fellow book friends. Our theme today is we were challenged to kind of Freaky Friday this podcast up. So today, the role of Virginia will be played by Emma. The role of Emma will be played by Virginia. The role of Sadie will be played by Kareen. And the role of Kareen will be played by Sadie. And I've mixed that up again? No, son of a gun. I know. Oh, gosh, there's a spreadsheet and everything. That's fine. We all like Jamie Lee Curtis, Lindsay Lohan, this. Everyone's someone else who knows where we ended up. It's a Russian roulette of like brains in different bodies. So we have all read a book from a genre or format that is deeply beloved by a fellow book friend. So, since apparently I can't get this order right, Virginia, who did you end up reading?
Well, I think you're trying to your mental has blocked it out because I'm reading a book for you. So I think that's why you blocked it out in your brain. So that makes sense. You're like, that cannot happen. So yeah, that's probably why.
It just doesn't sound right. This can only go poorly. And then Emma, I'm pretty sure that you are playing the part of Virginia today. Is that right? Okay. And then I'm Sadie today. But I don't think I did a really good job of being Sadie. And then Sadie, that means you are Emma. So, okay, do we kind of go by different monikers today? So it's Virginia Brown, Kareen Henschel. Well, that just means you're married. No, wait, there's got to be a better. It's got to be like better like portmanteaus that we can do. Virginine, Virginine, Karindi, Karindi. Yes. All right. Anyways, I'm going to workshop this a little bit. I'm very much looking forward to that. So we're going to start with Virginia, who will be playing the part of me today. So Virginia, how much did you hate your book?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, my assignment was Korean today. And Korean, as you all know, has many, many interests. But one of the things I always appreciate is when Corinne goes traveling, she'll send me a highlight reel of the art that she sees. Now, I don't know how she chooses which ones to send me, but inevitably, the ones that she does not care for are the ones I'll be like, oh, that looks so cute. And she's like, what the heck are you talking about? Which, of course, tracks because Corinne and I like very, very different things. So I knew that, but I always look forward to your photos, so keep them coming. Anyway, so I know that instead of a format or a genre, I have to do something with art, right? Like an art book, because that's kind of your thing. And so originally I had one in mind that kind of ties in with actually last week's my book because Benjamin Moser, in addition to being a expert in the Spectre, also is very knowledgeable art. And then his latest book is actually about Dutch artists. So I was going to do something with that book, and then I was going to and I couldn't get a hold of it. So then I was going to do a book that he blurbed, which is about a journalist who and her attempt to penetrate into this art world. She wants to understand the inside joke. Why is it everybody's laughing and she doesn't get it? And so she wants to No, she want to be in the, group. But since I have very little sense of humor these days, I find myself very like just not in the right mindset, let's just to say, to appreciate the voice of the author. And so I was not, so I didn't do that book. And so I switched. And I think I went with something that I believe, and Corinne can correct me, I believe this is a purchase suggestion from you for the library to order it. The book is called Your Brain on Art. Okay, yes, it is. How the Arts Transform Us by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. And Corinne is cackling in the back earlier. I don't know what that means. I guess we will find out. See if we also look at this book differently, like how we look at art. Anyway, so Susan Magsamen is a member of the Johns Hopkins University Faculty of Medicine. Ivy Ross is works at Google, and she's the vice president of hardware design, I believe. And so, the book is trying to use questions like, part of your brain is active when you doodle, or what is actually happening to your body when you get up and do the chicken dance along with all the other guests at a wedding reception, or why does hearing the C chord reduce your anxiety? And Emma, how when you and I are having a headache, we should really not be hiding in a blanket, but we should, like with the lights off, but we should get up and move around and dance around, apparently. And using all these questions, the authors are trying to show us how important art is to our physical and our emotional health. And their field of study is neuroaesthetics or neural arts. And it's basically the study of how art physically change our body and change the wiring in our brain. And when they say the word art, it's a very, very broad definition. And it seems to get broader and broader as the book goes on. It's not just the visual arts, but also music, dancing, theater, reading poetry. And then it's also not just like the more complex form of it, but even just the building block, a sound, a smell, and tracking how our body and our brain react to them. And so they're also talking not about just making art or creating art, but also like consuming is not quite a word. I think they said like beholding art. Like, so it's just like when you're like kind of engaged in art, basically. And so the different chapters, they sort of divided up by talking about art's impact on your general well-being, on how it heals mentally and physically, how it helps you learn, and how it creates community. Looking at different case studies, they talking to different people who are involved in organizing like art-based programs in schools, in hospitals, and the people that are like applying the findings of neuroaesthetics. They try to cover like a whole wide range of like how all these different kinds of art change people's lives. So, for example, a firefighter who has PTSD, and every time when he arrives on the site of a fire, he will immediately think that somebody is trapped on the second floor because that's where sort of he has that traumatic incident, and how doodling helps him deal with all those feelings. Then they have studies about like students who had like band practice in their school, who have access to learn an instrument, and how they benefit and score higher on a bunch of different like measurements on social skills, on logical thinking. Different, doesn't matter what their social economic statuses are, everybody sort of benefit from that. Or how Starbucks basically reinvent themselves by putting all their CEOs in a room, giving them an iPod with all the Beatles song, and then have them stay in the room with all the everything Beatles, and so that they can sort of inspire them to think about what makes Beatles so important to them and try to reinvent the company that way. And many, many other examples and studies are cited. And so they're trying to argue that when you engage in art, something happens to your body physically and something happens to your brain. And they're trying to advocate for more and more art-based programs everywhere so that, we can have a better quality of life. Now, after reading the prologue, I wanted to put this book down. And at many different points of my reading, I just wanted to change books. I'm just like, and I didn't. I persevered. I finished it. May have skimmed a couple paragraphs here and there, to be honest, but like I did finish reading it. And so after reading it and throughout the whole thing, I'm trying, why am I so irritated at this book? Because I believe in the message. I think like many people who have like engaged with arts, you experience the benefit of arts, right? As they say, as I said, the art definition is very broad. So like in my free time, I engage and devote myself to the art of reading. And I feel bad always because like I tend to only do art when I have to, or when there's a reason. Like I have to paint some stuff for the library display, or I have to cross stitch to like for somebody's birthday present. Like I will do art when there's a reason. And but every time I finish a project, I always say to myself, you should really do this more frequently because I really enjoy the process. Like when I'm in it, I feel those like benefits that the authors are talking about. I feel like I'm more relaxed. I feel like I'm not as stressed. And then of course what I really enjoy is that flow states that they talk about, right? That you just like kind of everything just disappear around you, and then like 3 4 hours later you're like, oh, like what happened to time, because you're so engaged in what you're doing. So I fully support their argument about the importance of art, but like, so why am I so annoyed at this book? um I think at first I thought like, okay, well, maybe it's just because I was expecting more neuroscience, because that is an area that I'm really interested in. And with a book when you call like your brain on art, I was expecting more about that. So maybe I was a little disappointed, but that shouldn't get me so annoyed. So what is it? And then I think the best way I could think of it is that like I feel like there's like kind of two different wildly different like voices and tones throughout the book, right? So you got all these studies that they're citing, and granted, I have not looked at like the validity of any of them, like assuming that they're valid, because that's not really the point here. So assuming that they're valid, like they include a lot of these studies about like, what happens to your brain or what happens to your body during art. But I feel like they're not always very detailed. So some of them feel like throwaway because they would just mention one thing and then they just like move on to the next thing. So I would like a little bit more information. I would like a little bit more deep dive into them. But also abruptly from these like scientific studies, they would turn it, they would then go into these very general statements like, oh, poetry creates activity in your brain which intensify emotions. Okay, so poetry evokes feelings. I think we all got that. I don't think this is any like earth-shattering thing, or like, oh, cooking together, or like, when you're dancing together, it promotes social bonding. Yes, I got that. So it's like this weird general statements, and then there's like these studies, and it just doesn't work for me. And then there's a lot of like, isn't it great? Art is great. Go do art. You should go do art. It's really, really great. And then I'm just like, I feel like despite them having like including studies, I just and they're not very detailed. I just feel like the book is kind of sometimes feel like a little self-helpy to me, that they're trying to sell me something. Like I'm like in one of those like motivational seminars or something where they're just like keep telling me like, oh, it's great. I know the secret. Art is great. Do art. And so it was very weird to me. And sometimes even like some of the statistics that they throw out feel very like when you're reading one of those like clickbait article, and then where they say, oh, like people who go to like the theater every few months have a 31% lower risk of dying early or whatever. And it's just like it just doesn't feel like there was any support to it. And so what I really would prefer is having like the argument. They can present the argument, and then they can give me evidence to support the argument, and don't end with, isn't that great? No, end with like, let me decide. Let me decide based on what you're presenting me, like whether you have like prove your points, whether I, like believe you, or I think that, yes, I think what you're presenting to me is right. So like it was weird. I also find the fact that they are including so many different things as art very, very weird. Like they were just randomly adding more and more. And I think that really dilute the message that they are trying to suggest about like certain arts, like, having like arts-based program, for example, in a hospital that helps people, right? Because sure, all those other things are beneficial and they make our lives better, but you don't have to include them all. Just focus on what like I think most people would think of as arts, right? So make your point about them. But because when you start talking about cooking with your family or like walking in nature, then you're losing me. Because to me, that's not quite arts, because you're just talking about everything in life that makes you feel better, and just doesn't work for me. Anyway, like at one point, like they talk about, I think Daniel Levitin, I think is a university professor, and they started to talk about how he plays music as the students come into the auditorium for his lectures, right? And so they, I think the whole point is to talk about like benefits of music and how it helps you learn. So tell me more about that. But no, they just keep telling me how funny Daniel Levitin is, right? And how the students love him because he's so funny. Like sometimes he'll put his lecture into like a Madonna song. He would sing it. Oh, he's such a great sense of humor. Oh, by the way, humor is also great for you. And so I'm like, no, no, get back to the point about music. I want you to I want to learn more about like how music actually affect the brain, how music actually helps, and all I can remember now is that he's funny. And that's why the people learn better, not because of music. I think that's why I'm annoyed at this. I don't know. I just having a little bit of trouble with this. So yeah, again, I mean, their message is good. I totally support their argument, and I think anyone who again engage in arts will know the benefits of arts. But it's just I needed something more than this. So anyway, sorry, Miss Corinne. Yeah, I tried. I should have picked something else. Anyway, so if you are not convinced that you should art, this is the book maybe for you. It is called Your Brain on Art: How the Arts Transform Us by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross.
It's
See,
interesting because I was actually going to suggest, Virginia, that if you're wanting more neuroscience, you check out Levitin's book, This Is Your Brain on Music, because he actually has a whole book about the neuroscience behind what music actually does, like on a neuroscience physiological way to your brain. So if anyone is looking for more information about Levitin besides the fact that he's funny, because he has a neuroscience, and I think he worked in I think he was like a rock and roll musician for many, many years, as well. So he has like the music as well as the neuroscience background. It's one of my favorite nonfiction books. This Is Your Brain on Music by Levitin.
See, I would argue, Virginia, that you had a very Korean reading experience and that you went in expecting something and then were horribly disappointed and couldn't quite understand why the authors were doing and making the choices that they had. Um, yeah, because I actually had a similar experience with starting that book, in that I really did think it was about the neuroscience. And I thought that that would be very interesting to kind of like examine that in detail. And I was like, mm, just narrow your focus. Narrow your focus. Just think of your high school teacher like over your shoulder saying like narrow your focus. Yes. Yeah, so Virginia, like thank you for trying. Thank you for trying. And now you have all these facts in your brain that I'm sure are going to come in very, very they're going to be very useful for you in the future if you ever meet Daniel Levitin and you just like, "Hey, you're funny." Um Yeah, dance monkey. But yeah, so Virginia, for yourself, what would you like characterize as a Virginia book?
um, I think I mean, as you said, Banana Pants is mine, I think. I think from the beginning of the podcast to now, I feel like we've all, I don't know, some of us have changed a little bit in terms of our reading. I think right now at this moment, I think yeah, so Banana Pants, weird, surreal things that don't make any sense. But also I think books that are that get me maybe more kind of thinking more. I think I'm getting old, and so you think about like life a different way. So I think I'm looking for books that makes me like think a little bit more than before. So I'm kind of I feel like I'm picking up some of those books that Fiona likes, which is the ones and nothing happens. I feel like I'm reading a lot of those and I'm enjoying them. And I think also I feel like I'm now even more so less plot. I don't really care as much. I want good writing. I really need it to feel that the sentences are good, or else I'm just I just don't care. And like I said, I don't really care for funny these days. There's something wrong with me. So I'm just I need something depressing. And that's kind of what I've been reading mostly. Um, but at the same time, I think it's also books that I'm just sometimes they're just they're so weird that they are just absolutely delightful, and that goes to what Emma would be talking about in a bit. But just I we still need there still need to be something that tether me to either the character or something. I can't it can't just be weird for the sake of being weird. So yeah, I don't know. going through a weird phase, let's just say.
I like that you really are grappling with like the existential questions, not just in the podcast, but just in life. Yeah, I can see that. I like that you said like weird, not for the sake of being weird.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of books that I read are weird. Like, I mean, there's no question about that, but like they have to have something else besides the weird. Yeah. And I think the other thing also, like, I feel like I'm also not romance, but reading a lot of like relationship book. I think that's kind of like, again, just kind of, like just looking at people and like how different people interact and that type of stuff, and just like what, again, like, yeah. So I don't know. Again, it's, yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, with all of that in mind, Emma, with all of that in mind, um, this is Virgemma. Yes, that's my portmanteau for that. So for Gemma, what Virginia book did you end up picking?
So I'm quite lucky that Virginia and I typically enjoy a lot of the same stuff. Like obviously I like manga and I like the warrior bonds of men, but I also like things that are a little bit weird. And I like things that like talk about like the existentialism, the human condition. This like I like things that are a little bit depressing and sad. So part of me was like, is it cheating to choose to read a Virginia book when our reading tastes are already similar? It might be, but did I do it anyway? Absolutely. So unfortunately, I was kind of disappointed with the book that I read this week because, like Virginia said, she likes things that are really weird, but that have purpose to them, things that are not just weird for the sake of being weird, things that are weird because they're telling a story and the thing like they're telling a story about human condition. They're telling a story about the relationships with people. And I did not find that in the book that I read this week. This is the book that Virginia has already read, so I'm excited to hear what her opinions are about it. But we both agreed that we didn't really like it. It was kind of weird and just like going all over the place without really connecting ever. But that's okay. It's fine. It's okay to read things that you might not like. It definitely was weird. I would definitely call it a little banana pantsy. But I wish it had some more like I wish it had more of an overall message. I wish it was a little bit more cohesive in the end. But that's fine. It's okay. I'll talk about it anyway. So the book that I have today, it's from quite a prolific Japanese author who I've personally never read before. We will see if I read her after this. But I think her other books are quite different from the one that I have today. So hopefully, if I read one of those, I will enjoy it more. This author has won numerous different Japanese prizes for literature, many of which share the same names as Bungo Stray Dogs characters, including the Tanizaki Prize, the Izumi Kyoka Prize for Literature, and of course the Akutagawa Prize. Virginia has said before that her goal is to read more authors who've won the Akutagawa Prize, so this falls into that. The author's mostly known for fiction and some poetry, and she's probably best known for her novels The Nakano Thrift Shop and Strange Weather in Tokyo. She mostly writes realistic literary fiction or urban fiction. But like I said earlier, this book is quite different from what she usually does. It's a little banana pants. It's a collection of short stories that describe that kind of incorporate mythology and folklore, magical realism, a little bit of paranormal fiction and horror. So I thought on paper it sounded like totally like an Emma book. I was really excited for it. So I was a bit disappointed. But the book is called Dragon Palace by the Japanese author Hiromi Kawakami. So the book is short stories. It contains 8 short stories that aren't necessarily connected. I didn't find that they were connected at all. Aside from the fact that they're each kind of based off of different like Japanese myths or folklore, or they have characters that come from Japanese mythology. One of them, there's a shape-shifting con man who manipulates a man with depression into giving him all of his money. All the while, the con man is claiming that he is an octopus. So he's telling all of these stories. I know it's weird. He's just like, I'm an octopus. Let me tell you about it. And so they like bar hop. It's so weird. They just like they bar hop all through town, like gradually stealing more and more of this man's money. And the depressed guy just like goes along with it. And he keeps saying, like, wow, this man is really annoying. I really shouldn't be following him. And then he continues to follow him. Um, and the story, okay, the ending was quite rough for this one because the octopus man, he parks the two of them outside of like a train station entrance where women are walking past to go into the train station. And he is assigning like adjectives and numbers to rate the women. So he's like trying to pick his favorite one. He's just standing here like objectifying and rating these women. And then they end up choosing one who they then chase down the street harassing. And that's about where the story ends. So yeah, like it's weird. The octopus man is weird, but it's like weird and also a little bit misogynistic. But we'll move past that. The next story, there's a woman who is kind of worshipped as a goddess because she like spews nonsense, she spews gibberish, and people start taking the words that she says for prophecy. And so a cult is essentially formed, worshiping this woman as she's a goddess. But she also uses meaningless sex to control her followers. At one point, she ends up like going to a fishing village, and she's a beggar. She goes like door to door at night, like asking for food, and they all give her plates as like offerings because they treat her like she is a goddess. But then she says that sometimes she knocks on their front door instead of their back door, and she just sleeps with whoever happens to answer it, whether it's a man or a woman. And I'm like, I love the bisexuality, but like there's a lot of meaningless sex going on. It's just like it's a little much. The next story, there is a 90-year-old man who's like kind of maybe possessed by a fox spirit. He's described as like his face kind of shapeshifts, kind of changes from like fox to human. And he also has a like questionable sexual relationship with his caregiver, who is half of his age. So like many of the stories in this book have very, very questionable sexual relationships. Um, some of them more problematic than others. There is one story that contains a sexual assault in it that I did not enjoy. That story overall was probably the one I enjoyed the most, just because the narrator in that one I thought was given quite a bit more depth than some of the other characters. So in this story, the one I'm describing now, there is a three-faced kitchen god who lives under the fridge in a woman's apartment, and he watches her as she eats drywall, and her neighbors keep kind of passing in and out of her life, complaining about a weasel infestation in their building, and yet nobody has seen the weasels. They just complain about the weasels, but I don't actually know if there's weasels there. And I like this one because the narrator, the woman in the story, is quite like a flawed character. Like she's eating drywall, she's cheating on her husband. She's a kleptomaniac, so she keeps like going to the convenience store and stealing things. So like I liked that she had a little bit of depth going on. I liked that she kept making really bad decisions, but like there was a little bit more purpose to it. But then at the end, she gets assaulted, and that's kind of where the story ends. And I was just like, cool, awesome, moving on from that. Um, so yeah, this was kind of like my experience going through all of these stories. Like they're all weird. They're all a little bit banana pantsy in their own ways. Um, Overall themes that kind of connect them are like a lot of the characters have there's like very little boundary between what's human and what's animal. So what some characters are described as being like definitely entirely human, while some are described as being a little bit inhuman. Some are considered gods, some are considered animal spirits. There's one story where the protagonist is a mole who steals depressed humans from the surface and brings them down to live underground with him and like cares for them. Um, so there's a lot of like this kind of animal theme happening, but then a lot of the stories are also sort of connected by like the questionable sexual relationships that people have. And like, I don't fully understand what the purpose of that was. Like, I understand if Kawakami was putting that in because she was trying to send a message about it, but like maybe I'm not smart enough to read this book, but I didn't get it. I like things that are a little bit weird, that are going towards something in the end, that are saying some Virginia's nodding, that are saying something about the human condition. And I didn't really find that in this story. Like, I'm not bothered by stories that have open endings. I'm not bothered if there's not a resolution at the end. Um, but in these ones were so short that I wish they had like each story was like 20 pages or under. So I wish they were just giving me a little bit more to work with because I found them quite unsatisfying. Yeah, I would love to hear what Virginia has to say because I feel like a lot of my thoughts are quite negative. But like the writing was excellent. Like Kawakami is clearly a very good writer. It just the content of the book, and it could also be that it's just like not the right time in my life to read a book like this, but the content of the book just wasn't what I was looking for. It was weird but not banana pantsy enough. It was kind of like pointlessly weird without really going anywhere. But Virginia, can I ask your opinions?
Well, first of all, I'm very impressed that you can talk about it so logically about like stories that I'm just like, what is happening in all of these? Yeah, like I think you describe it like really well. Like I mean, I don't know what she's trying to tell me with any of these stories. Like at the end of it, like when it ends, I'm like, okay, like now what? Like what are you trying to say here? And I couldn't figure it out. And I'm just like, okay, well maybe it's just me because I'm like I feel like I'm not getting the message, right? Like all the themes, like you said, like the transformation with the all the animals ones, the random sex that they have with everybody. Like I'm just trying to like, what are you trying to say here? And I just don't couldn't get it. And I think it's just like some like strange thing happens. I'm like, okay, then what? Like, so yeah, like occasionally there's like I think there's like images or there's something like oh yeah, that sounds interesting. The octopus. I did like the octopus story in especially in the beginning, which is like, let me tell you, I'm not octopus, like right. So I do like that part of it. Like the mole one was interesting. Is that the same? I see I'm mixing them all up too. Like is that the one that like these little the people turn into like tiny little and they just put into the pocket? Is that one?
Yeah, in the mole one. So he goes around. I was actually spoiler alert, I did not finish this book. So I was reading the mole one on the train on my way here today. And he goes around Tokyo and like looks for people who are really depressed. And like clearly some people are kind of in on it because they'll be like, oh, there's one over there for you. And he'll take them. And when he takes them, they turn into little tiny. There's a lot of like turning into little tiny people that happens in multiple different stories. Where like somebody just shrinks and then is carried away in the palm of someone else's hand. But yeah, the mole guy like takes the people and like puts them in his pocket and takes them underground to live in the warmth with him and his wife, and they care for them. But like, why? Well, I don't get it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is a lot of I don't get it. And so I just feel like I'm missing something. Like I don't know. Yeah. So it's just because there's nothing that tethered me to any of the characters. I really don't really care what happened to them because I don't know what the point is, right? So it makes it really, really hard to like stay engaged with them. So they're just
And
like,
a lot of the narrators kind of go through the experiences that happen to them, like feelingless. Like they'll just be like, and then this happened, and it'll be like some really awful, terrible thing, but they're just like, so like yeah, like you said, I'm not invested in any of the characters in here. So like as their stories were going, I'm like, frankly, I don't really care. And I like things that are weird. I like things that are like difficult to understand, but when I can care about the people. So
yeah.
yeah. I
And
mean,
usually,
like, yeah, go ahead.
no, and usually at the end, right? Once all the weirdness happen at the end, you're like, oh, okay. And then when you look back at him, like that's why that weird thing happened. And you can like start to connect the different parts of it. I just feel like there was nothing there to, yeah.
Yeah. So like I wonder, I mean, I don't remember where I read this, so who knows the accuracy of it, but I'm pretty sure that these are stories that Hiromi Kawakami wrote earlier in her career that she like put together in a collection. So it's possible that they're just not supposed to connect, that they're all just like really random, super weird stories that she wrote and was like, hey, throw it in a book. We'll throw it all together. So like there could just be no point to it. It could just be like weird, wacky little short stories that she wrote. And there are probably like you said about your brain, this is your brain on art book. Like there are probably readers out there who would really connect with something like this. It just wasn't right for me right now. So like I don't want our listeners to take this review and be like, wow, that book must be garbage. I shouldn't read it. Because it definitely would Corinne's giving me a look. Because it definitely probably would connect to some people. And if you already really enjoy Hiromi Kawakami's writing, if you like the writing was really, really well done. It was easy to read because the writing was like really, really high quality. So if you've liked Nakano Thrift Shop, if you've liked Strange Weather in Tokyo, then you would probably get something out of this one as well. It's just like be prepared for something really, really weird that you definitely won't understand. And that's Dragon Palace.
Okay. Cool. So so Emma, you talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but what do you think characterizes like a good, perfect Emma book?
My range can be like in all different directions sometimes. So like I do love a good sports manga. I also love a romance manga. I also love the warrior bonds of men. But I feel like lately the kind of books I've been reading have been like Virginia books. They've been kind of like a little bit speculative fiction, magical realism, science fiction, kind of like dipping toes in those different genres. And I don't really read like straight up horror, but I like things with horror elements to them, things that are like kind of spooky and freaky. But also that are like telling something with the weirdness, that have a message to the weirdness. One book that I know Virginia loves that I just finished last weekend that I like devoured, I loved it so much, was called Our Wives Under the Sea. So yeah, it's just like it's so weird. But it's like it's super weird and it's got this like magical realism element to it. But it's also like the core of the book is about the relationship between these two women who are married, and they're like I there are few books that I've read where a relationship between two people has felt so real to me, has felt just so like tangible and like accurate and relatable. So I really, really loved that book. Like I love the weird elements that are thrown into it. I love the kind of mystery elements. You're trying to figure out what happened to one of the wives and why she's turning into this weird ocean creature. But like it's the relationship that these two have and the love and care that they have for one another that really like made the book for me. So like things like that, things that are really weird but have something else going on that are about the human connection and the human experience. So those are typically the kinds of books that I enjoy.
Splendid. All right, thank you. We're going to turn to Corinne D now. So pleased with myself. Yeah, so because I was late to the spreadsheet, I ended up with Sadie, which honestly was not such a bad thing. Honestly, I was quite relieved, because of all of my book friends, I think Sadie and I both really enjoy something that makes sense. Oftentimes when Virginia is describing her books, I can see Sadie's little face in the Zoom call, and her face is usually a mirror of mine of just like, why? Just why? Why are we doing this? Why is this happening? Who is this for? It's not for us. So I feel like Sadie and I actually, as readers, do have a lot in common, and that we do enjoy something that is, I'm going to use the word grounded, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more like clear, that kind of just makes sense. Like we get from A to B. I feel like our tolerance for banana pants is about the same. So I was actually very pleased that that turned out the way it did. So kind of as I said, Sadie, for me, it was an easy one to pick. I just went to the new shelves and picked a new YA fantasy book, with some depth and something to say. Because I feel like Sadie's books, she does love a YA fantasy. She does love Kelly Armstrong, but I was like, I feel like you covered that, so I feel like I'm okay. I feel like you like strong characters. Not necessarily that they have to be like punching people in the face, but they have to really make sense and you have to connect with them. And I think that you like a good cohesive plot, which is something that we really share, as well as something that has like a social justice theme or something to say. So it's not just that they're slinging swords and shooting magic at each other. Like it has to be saying something a little bit more, I feel like, for you to really enjoy it. And this book does have things to say. Um, this is going to be really tough to talk about. As I said, I was extremely concerned, because about 7/8 of the way through, I was like, I don't know if this is a fantasy book or not. It's unclear. It's unclear if there is going to be magic here. And I think there was. Pretty sure there was. So I picked up A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid, who has previously written books for adults, and I can tell. And then this is her first kind of YA debut. And I thought, okay, like magical books, a little bit of fantasy, girl going to a university who has to discover like something about this mystical manuscript. I was like, okay, this is all Sadie. And then again, I didn't read that far into the description because it has to do with fairies, and I know you don't care about them. And maybe after this book, I don't care about them. So I feel like I didn't exactly fulfill the brief, but I sure did try. Because again, I think this hits some of the things for you and then very much misses the marks for others. So our main character is Effie. Oh, I've never tried to say this out loud. Sayer, Sire, Sayer. We're gonna pass and never mention that last name again. I don't think it's important. And she has kind of spent her life believing in fairy tales because her own life has been a very dark, very disturbing fairy tale. She has been haunted ever since she was young by the Fairy King, this dark, menacing creature who tried to lure her away into his court. He is cold, demanding, and speaks of an all consuming love. She sees him everywhere, even when she takes the pink pills not to see him. Now, she has been obsessed ever since she was young by a single book. Another word that I have never said out loud. Oh boy. Angrad. It's gonna be bad. Angrad. Angrad? Angrad. I am sure putting some spin on that. Angarad. Again, I feel like this is like Irish inspired. Another thing for Sadie, but I don't speak Gaelic, so here we go. Angarad, which is the tale of a young woman who is beloved by the fairy king, who makes him fall in love and then ultimately destroys him. This book is written by a very famous author, a reclusive author, who has recently passed away and has been added to the Sleeper Museum, a strange place where the bodies of authors of Lyrian tales that the people love have been put in rest, and who some people believe protect their land from the invaders. The Lyrian people love stories, they love books, and they revere them among all things, thinking that they have a little bit of magic to them. Now, Effie passionately wanted to study literature at university. However, women are not allowed to study literature. And so she goes for her second choice, architecture. One could argue that you should not study architecture unless you're really passionate and serious about it, because you're designing houses that people need to live in. And if you're not good at it or not really like committed to the cause, people die. But anyways, she's kind of drifting through architecture, failing and being harassed by her fellow students, mostly for being a woman, but also for what they believe is an illicit relationship between her and one of the professors there, which was very much against her will. At the school, she sees an advertisement for a competition. The family of the man who wrote the Angaram is having a competition to redesign his house. His descendants, his son and his wife, live in Hirath Manor, out in the so many words, the really crummy lands in the south. So there was like some weird climate disaster called the drowning, where all these people who are living in the south drowned. Um, there was a big storm, and now they live real close to the sea, and the sea's trying to eat them. But let me put this house here, anyways. There, and he's having a competition to redesign Hira's manor, and she, a first year architecture student designing houses that people have to live in structures that have to withstand, the elements, decides to enter the competition. And to her utter surprise and mine, she wins. So she is taken away from the university, a place of strife to her, down to whatever these lands are called in the south. Ugh. Drowned, wet, soggy. I'm going to call them the soggy bottoms. It's fine. She is there where she meets the son of her most favorite author, as well as a rival academic who is there to research the author's old diaries, hoping to find something to finish his thesis. However, as she digs deeper, she realizes that there are many secrets about this author, and she starts getting more and more glimpses of the Fairy King who lurks in the soggy bottom, whatever it's called. Gosh darn it. Yes, bad things are afoot. The water's rising. The Fairy King rides at dawn. Okay. Did I do a good job of that? No. This book is like a lot more about atmosphere than perhaps it is about plot, and there is a lot of it. I think that what this book does very well is that it is kind of like moody, drifty sadness and a deep examination of what it is to live under the oppressive patriarchy and sexism. And I think it does that very well. Like it's using this metaphor of the fairy king to kind of represent the infection of patriarchy and how it gets its little like fingers into every single thing. And it does that really well. Effie, our protagonist, is kind of rough to read. She is meek and dreaming through life. She's very adrift. Again, she's an architecture student and should definitely be taking that a lot more seriously if she doesn't want to kill a bunch of people with her buildings. And you know, the romance was very sweet, but I just want to be maybe the first person to say this on this podcast. I don't think I've said this before, so I want to like shelf out this like life advice. You don't need to fall in love with the first person who's nice to you. You can shop around a little bit or just kind of like wait it out. Like just because it's like the very first person who says something nice to you and isn't horrible to you, you are not obligated to fall in love with him. Yeah. And that the twist is very obvious from about page 15, and then you know when you've kind of figured it out and you're like, well, obviously it's this. There's no other option but this. And then it makes the character seem stupid because they don't even consider it, and you're like, well, obviously A is B. Just throw it out there and then discount it and then you can move on, but A is B. There's no other thing that it can be. There's nothing that it can be. It's only this. Um, and so that was kind of tough because these people are apparently two brilliant literature scholars and just cannot fathom that something might be that. Um, oh, what's the point of book reviews? Anyways, yeah. So, was this the worst book that I've read this year? No. No, 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 no. There have been so much worse this year. This has been a rough year. It's been a really, really rough year. And so honestly, getting able to read something that is technically a fantasy, think, I think, I think there are definitely people who are like fairies are real and other people who are like, oh, they're not. But if they were, like, you guys would know. Like, if they're doing magical things, like, you'd know. How do you not know? Um, yeah, and the world building in this was really tricky, because they had the drowning, this kind of event, and then they're also at war with this other country, and there's the Berlin Wall going through their town, and then there's also cars, which is fine. And then I was like, okay, so it's like a 1920s-ish thing. Okay, fine, that's fine. There's no women, like we're getting there. And then there were suddenly TVs, and I was like, no, no, I'm gonna draw the line at TVs. Because if you have TVs, then everyone should have TV. And so if there's TV, then you should have radio. And if you have radio, then you guys should be like, hey, everyone's drowning. Let's get into a boat or something. And no one has a radio. So you can't have TV without radio. So I'm going to need you to like tighten that up. And then if you have magic, no magic, like what are the sleepers doing? And like that was the most interesting part of it. But like, is there magic, no magic? Because you should really know. Like you should know. Someone should know. It should be a generally agreed upon thing if there is magic or not. Shouldn't be like wobbly. If you're making a museum full of like dead people who are apparently protecting your land, like
Be sure. Be sure. Otherwise, it's like a very grotesque wax museum. Yeah. But in its defense, A leads to B leads to C. And I understood what was happening and why people were doing the stupid things that they were doing. So, yes, this was a book. I didn't hate it. I was glad to do a YA fantasy. I don't read a ton of YA, and so this was fine. This was fine. This was fine. Um, this was fine. Yeah.
One of my biggest pet peeves and the things that I struggle with the most is when I can't tell when a story is set if it's supposed to be set in the real world. And that's just something, and I know some authors use that and some authors do that on purpose. But I think it goes along with my like needing A to lead to B to lead. Like I need that logical kind of linear progression. And if you have no idea when your book is set, then how like yeah. So I can understand that frustration in that. It sounds like there's too much going on. Like pick an avenue and focus on it. Just a little.
It was so busy. It was so busy. There's so much going on. And like what it really wants to be, and I think it could really achieve, is like, this is sexism. This is a world of sexism, and sexism is like a slow drowning. Because that's kind of like the metaphor that's going through the entire thing, is that the water level is slowly rising. And one of the characters says, it's like a frog boiling in a pot. So at the beginning, when you just raise the temperature a little bit, the frog doesn't realize what's happening. And then you just slowly, incrementally, degree by degree by degree, raise the temperature until the frog is in boiling water and it dies. And that's kind of the metaphor that I think she's trying to go for, like with these the soggy bottoms, the 100 downs, the really wet place, whatever it's called. It's the same thing, is that people don't realize the danger or the impact that sexism is having on them until it kind of reaches that boiling point. And I think that the author is trying to say, is using that, and she uses kind of like the sexism and the misogyny of the university. So Effie is dealing with kind of a traumatic incident with her mentor, to say that you don't realize it until something truly horrible happens, but it's been there all along. And I think that that is a really powerful metaphor. And I think, again, if she had kind of stuck to that a little bit stronger, I think that it could have been really good, because her writing is quite clear and concise and poetic. And I can see, like, I would be interested in kind of picking up her adult stuff to see if she's able to kind of like, again, narrow that focus just a little bit more to make it more cohesive. But the world building was interesting, but it's like, that's not our focus. We're over here. We're over here with televisions. Like, you can't have televisions. You just can't. You just can't have TVs. I'm so sorry. I'm putting my foot down as the reader. That's it.
And then why fairies? Why, like, that just feels like another thing that's just kind of thrown in for no reason apart from teens like fairies. Let's add some fairies into this. There's a trend right now for fae books, so why not?
I think that the Fairy King is supposed to be like an infection of toxic masculinity. And I think he's real. Pretty sure. But again, if fairies were real and able to impact the real world, surely we would have like everyone be like, oh yeah, that's like Fairy Bob. He stole my shoes and, put my hair into knots last night. Um, yeah, but I feel like it's like the children of this is like the podcast of me saying words out loud that I've never said before. The children of Lear Liar, because I feel like this is really steeped in like Irish mythology of that real, not real, fantasy, not fantasy, fairies being a metaphor for other things. And I think that's really interesting that she's picking it up, but it's really hard to buy into a world where it's like either these are real or they're not. You have dead people in a museum who are apparently like taking down tanks. Like,
Pickly.
Well, of course, before you get away with it, what is a Korean book? Just because you're not going to ask yourself that question. So let us make sure we ask you that question. Describe a Korean book.
Yeah, I was hoping not to answer that question. And I didn't want to talk about myself in the third person because that was last week's episode, which was really tricky. Um, hmm. Mm, I I think that I kind of have like two lanes. I like a really well-written nonfiction book. I really like a history book, an art history book, something that's clearly and concisely written in a really engaging way, or that's in one of like my areas of focus, like an art book that's really written well, a book about the economics of art, which I very much love, or art theft. Like so that is kind of what I've been interested in recently. And in terms of fiction, I prefer something where I can understand what's going on. I don't mind a foray into like something that's a little bit more surreal, provided that I don't feel like I'm being drugged. I'd like to retain my consciousness while reading. But I think if I could characterize like the books that I'm really into right now, it would be by yeah, that would be it. Not a totally like resigned sigh, but just kind of like an all right, this is it. Onward. Yeah, because I don't one thing that I don't like is books that are very like effusive in terms of like the emotions that they're trying to elicit for me. I really prefer them to be more subtle. And I think that's kind of what I'm more interested in right now, or the books that I'm kind of looking through my Goodreads and I'm like, I really enjoyed this, in that the writer is skilled enough to elicit an emotion in me without telling me what that emotion is supposed to be. And that can either be through plot, that can either be through character, but I think it has to be that they are trying to say something but not hit me over the head with it, which is what I've kind of really appreciated about the books that I've really enjoyed this year, is that they have something to say, but they're not shouting it. They're just presenting it in front of you, and then you take from it what you will. And so I think that's kind of it's kind of like a me book right now, because like a lot of us, like I don't particularly hew to any genre or format. It's just kind of like what vibe is good for me right now. All right. Okay, hold on. I need to math this out. Sedama? Sedama. Sedama, what book do you have for us?
Or it could be Emily. Yeah. So today I chose one of Emma's favorite formats, and listening to Emma talk about the books that she likes, I hit some, but I did not hit all. um, so I did pick a manga. It is not a romance. It is not a sports one, so I did not hit either of those. But I do also know that one of Emma's favorite manga series is Yona of the Dawn. And so I believe that Emma does enjoy a bit of a fantasy manga as well. So I did not do that one because I believe that Emma has talked about that already. But I did go to my usual Google search and typed in best fantasy manga series. And so two came up that kind of sounded interesting. The first one was Frieren Beyond Journey's End, which was written by Kanehito Yamada and illustrated by Tsukasa Abe. And I think that Emma said that it's has recently been made into an anime series as well. And I would say that it's definitely more of like a straight fantasy, a high fantasy. It's about an elven mage and her journey to kind of overcome her guilt from not getting to know her human companions better when they were still alive. The story starts after she and her three companions return from a 10-year quest of successfully defeating the Demon King. And the majority of the first volume takes place another 50 years after that, when Frieren has not aged at all, and her three companions are either very, very elderly or are kind of in the process of dying. As the first volume goes on, two of them do pass as well. I read the first volume of the series. I didn't mind it. It was fine, but I was not immediately drawn into it. And so I actually went to the second series that I had found, and I didn't think I was going to get a chance to read it because I had it on hold and it was due back at the library a couple weeks ago and it did not come back on time. And so I did finally get it a couple days ago. And I mean, the nice thing about manga is that they're very quick to read. So I read it, which is not usual for me in like half an hour. And so the second series was called Flying Witch. And it is by Chihiro Ishizuka. It is definitely still fantasy, but it's more of kind of a modern take, an urban fantasy, less high fantasy. And our story follows Makoto, who is a young witch from Yokohama. She is kind and polite and absolutely terrible with directions. She gets lost absolutely everywhere she goes, even if she has been to the place 100 times. Which is why, when, for her witch training, she must move in with her relatives in Hirosaki, her cousin Kai is there to meet her and her cat Cheeto, knowing that she would never make it to their house by herself. Hirosaki is new and different for Makoto. There's snow everywhere, even in April, but she's very excited to be there and excited to be able to complete her training and become a full-fledged witch. Kei and Makoto arrive at Kei's house, and Makoto is ecstatic to see her young cousin Chinatsu again. Chinatsu, on the other hand, does not remember ever meeting her and is immediately unsure what to think of this exuberant young woman. However, her feelings change quite drastically when Makoto reveals that she is a witch. And she is learning how to be a witch, and she can fly on a broomstick. She, of course, immediately takes Chinatsu for a ride. The story continues in a very relaxed way. We kind of follow Makoto through her days as she adjusts to a new school, a new town, making new friends, particularly one of Kei's friends now. She knows that she's not supposed to tell any non-magical people about her abilities as a witch, apart from her family who does know. But she struggles to keep it a secret and soon tells now as well, excited to kind of be able to share more about herself and with her new friend. She also encounters some magical things along the way, like the screaming mandrake she tries to pick as a gift for now, the strange personified spirit of spring that shows up one day at her door, scaring Chinatsu half to death, or my personal favorite, when Kei, Chinatsu, and Makoto work to turn an abandoned piece of farmland into a harvestable garden, so Makoto can get to know the plants that she can use in her magic, and she sees a pheasant for the very first time and spends hours running after it, trying to catch it so she can learn more about it. And then her cat comes out and tries to catch it as well to learn more about it, and neither of them are successful. Near the end of the book, we also meet Makoto's older sister, Akane, who is already a full witch, and she spends most of her time traveling around the world. She's the complete opposite of Makoto. She's more brash and flighty, but still very, very kind. Always makes sure to come back and check in on her sister. She is described by Chinatsu as a hurricane, and before she disappears literally into thin air, she accidentally has Makoto try a spell that summons dozens and dozens of crows to her side. The series is very, very sweet. It's just a really sweet story about a young witch just trying to figure things out and kind of her friends and her family, they being there to support her along the way. It was described by one reviewer as a gentle slice of life story with just a hint of the unusual, which I think kind of did a good job of encompassing what the story is. I don't know if it fully fits into the slice of life genre, but it definitely kind of has that feel where you're just kind of following her on her day-to-day life and just kind of seeing how she interacts in her day-to-day life. And yeah, it's just kind of shows her making connections and relationships with those people around her. The first volume, at least I have not read any others, has no romance in it and focuses a lot more kind of on the friendships and the family connections. Makoto is very sweet and kind. She's kind of very true to the person that she is and has no intention of changing, even if this means getting laughed at for trying to eat snow and then realizing how cold it is. chasing a pheasant around or getting lost everywhere she goes. I have the second volume at home, and I think I might actually read it, which is it's a big one for me for manga. The series is rated as 13 plus. However, I'd say the first volume, there's nothing in it that would make it inappropriate for an even younger reader. But I can't speak for the rest of the series, so there may be some more mature content kind of as it goes on. But I think that if you do like kind of slice of life manga, or if you like a nice, gentle, cozy fantasy series, I think this had that kind of similar feel to it. Then Flying Witch would be a good choice for you. And there's a cat in it, so how can you go wrong?
Lovely. Right. So I know, Sadie, you don't read a ton of manga. So like, how was it? Like, did you feel relaxed by the experience? Was it stressful to be flipping books the wrong way?
No, I was fine with that. I felt relaxed. I think that I want more. And that I think has always been my struggle with manga, is that I want, like, I like the descriptiveness of kind of prose and of novels. And so I think that that's what I've often felt is missing for myself, at least. I think that maybe I'm just not quite as much of a visual based person. And so, like, I know that the manga also often provides the descriptions in the images, right? And so that's kind of where you get that. And that's just, I prefer to kind of have the description to read about, and then I can envision it in my head. And so I think that maybe that's why I've not always connected with manga as much. So I think that that was still a little bit of a struggle for me, just kind of getting very small amounts of text to help to kind of guide the story along. One thing, and this is probably just me and not having kind of the experience reading manga, is I'll often kind of read things and not fully understand like what the reaction is to, or what they're kind of talking about. And so I don't know if it's just me just kind of not understanding which images are being connected to the words, but yeah, it was an enjoyable experience. I don't know if it's enough to make me go out and read a lot of manga, unfortunately, but I think that I'm happy that I read it. I'm happy that I read both of the series. Um, and both of them, even the Frieren one where I was not super drawn into, I was interested in reading more of the series. And so I think that for this one, I'm definitely going to pick up the second one, and we'll see what happens.
You cried. Like, Sadie, what for you is a Sadie book?
So I think when we first described ourselves, and this was way, way back in 2020, when we first started this podcast, I'm fairly certain I described myself as liking character-based books, but I don't know if I fully understood what that meant, because I realize now that I do not like character-based books. I like books that have strong characters but are plot-based. So I think that that's really important. They need to be strong. I hate books that, even if the character says, I'm strong, I'm independent, I do what I want, and then does the exact opposite of that, it drives me absolutely crazy. So you have to support your talk with action. So I really like books with strong female protagonists, and kind of like the kick-ass kind of characters like that. I like a good heist. I like a good assassin book. I don't know what it is, but I tend to read a lot of books with assassins in them. Um, yeah, it has to have a good plot, though. It has to be, and like you're saying, Karine, like it has to go from A to B to C. I need to be able to follow it through. I don't do well with a lot of banana pants surreal stuff. I think that this is definitely one of the points where mine and Virginia's tastes do differ quite a bit, and I think this is kind of where my husband's crossover a little bit more with Virginia's taste, because he enjoys a bit of a banana pants story. But I need to have that logic in it. I need to have the kind of set in, not necessarily reality, because fantasy is not always set in reality, and that's okay, but just like set in a linear state. I need to be able to kind of follow that story. Yeah, strong characters, and like you said, Karine, saying something is always nice. Not just kind of magic for magic's sake, fantasy for fantasy's sake, although I do love any book that has magic in it. Yeah, that is my very all over the place description of the kind of books that I like.
That's fair. It'd be so strange to go back and watch the first episode and see ourselves describe ourselves as readers and be like, liar. Who are you?
Are you lying liar? All right. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Corversadma? Corversadma? Eh? 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 Or Okay, we'll workshop on. We'll work on it. We'll work on it. We'll work on it. This kind of wacky Wednesday episode of Keep It Fictional, where my goodness, we all tried. We all tried.
So what did we learn from this?
Stay in your lane.
Thank you.
I learned to really read the entire blurb of the book before taking that one home and not just going off the first 5 lines. Sadie, any lessons?
I mean, I don't know if I learned anything huge. Maybe I should have, but because I had a not a terrible experience with this, and so I maybe that's what I learned. Maybe it is okay to go outside of your lane every now and then, and you might find something that you enjoy.
That was perfect, Sadie. Wrap it up. Episode's over. We're done. Just end cap it with that. Virginia, edit it. We're finished. We're done. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy reading. Hopefully you found or did find something that you wanted to read. Farewell.